All right. It's 12:05. I imagine more people will kind of pile in as time goes on. But if you guys are all ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds good.
Sweet.
Sounds good.
So I'll start off by introducing PsychedelX, which this is the Intercollegiate Psychedelics Network's first public event. We're aiming this toward empowering emerging voices in the psychedelic space. And today we'll be having our industry panel with a few leaders in the psychedelic industry across various segments of it to discuss how you guys got here, why you're in psychedelics at all, and where you feel the field is going, and kind of general advice for students and early career people trying to get in. So I'm Bobby Tromm. I am a research and professional development Spore at the Intercollegiate Psychedelics Network, as well as the director of technology for Psygaia, which is a co-op focused on integrating psychedelic-assisted therapy with the environment and the climate crisis. And yeah, if we want to just go around clockwise, I suppose, and have everyone introduce themselves, that'd be dope. Ronan, you want to go first?
Sure. I was a little bit worried about which way was actually clockwise. So,
If you want.
hey, everyone. My name is Ronan. I'm one of the co-founders and the executive chairman of Field Trip Health. With Field Trip, we're really focused on the end-to-end development and delivery of psychedelic therapies. One of the things that are really unique about psychedelic therapies relative to most conventional Western allopathic medicine is just how important the experience is, as well as the drug. And so with Field Trip, we're building out Field Trip Health Centers, which are designed to provide an amazing setting to have psychedelic therapies with medical and professional oversight and therapy, and also building out the research and new molecules and new products to deliver as part of psychedelic therapies through our Field Trip Discovery division. So that's us in a nutshell.
Cool. Marik?
Sorry, I think our order is different depending on which screen you're on.
Yeah, we can't see the same thing that you can.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So founder of Energia, which holds Tabula Rasa, which is an incubator and accelerator for the psychedelics ecosystem, Fractal, which is an investment platform for the space, and Psyched, which is media company focused on the psychedelics ecosystem. But primarily everything we do is focused on investment and entrepreneurship in the space, and really working with entrepreneurs to be able to build psychedelic startups.
And I'm Eesmyal, or Ees for short. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Quantified Citizen, and we're a mobile health research platform for collecting secure, anonymous data to inform clinical research, clinical trials, observational studies, market research, and agile studies. We are currently focused on psychedelic research, and we're working with one of our business partners, Paul Stamets, and a number of academic researchers from the University of Washington, University of British Columbia, Maastricht, and Macquarie University on a bunch of psychedelic projects. And one of them is a 12,000 person mobile microdosing study on cognitive performance and mental health. And we just submitted our first paper. It's been over a year of collecting data now to, I guess I can't say which paper, journal, but very soon we'll get a response, and hopefully we'll have the first of 5 papers published on data, some of the insights, which is very exciting. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Well, thank you all. I'm really glad you're all here today. I'm curious, just as a bit of an icebreaker, like what got you all into the field of psychedelics? Not necessarily your respective companies, though that you can talk about that as well. Just what got you into it in the first place? Anyone can start.
I'll jump in just to break the silence. I'll say R, because all of myself and my co-founders in Field Trip all got into psychedelics at the same time. We were very active in the Canadian medical cannabis industry, having built the largest network of cannabis specialized medical clinics in Canada, a company called Canadian Cannabis Clinics. Sold that to a company called Aurora Cannabis. It was Aurora's first acquisition, very early days of the cannabis industry as well. Very actively involved in helping Aurora grow to become one of the largest global leaders in cannabis production. We left in 2018, and that's when we learned about what was happening in psychedelics. I had almost no firsthand knowledge of psychedelics up until that point, except one very drunken evening on New Year's Eve when I decided to dabble with things, but I had no idea what the effect of it was. And when we started looking into it and seeing the research and the evidence and anticipating that much like cannabis, there's going to be a whole new infrastructure needed to actually make this work. I mean, the evidence around psychedelic therapies is so persuasive. We realized that we had a unique skill set, that having built out the cannabis industry, and even though they're very different modalities, there are some overlapping considerations and requirements. And so spent a lot of time understanding what the opportunities were, given that all molecules are still scheduled by and large, with the exception of ketamine, at least in North America. Trying to figure out how we build a business model and get started, because we knew we wanted to get started and we recognized that this was going to be a thing, and spend some time figuring that out. And Field Trip was born in 2019, April 2019, with the kind of mission that I touched on earlier. Since the first conversation we had around psychedelics that introduced us to a lot of the excitement, Michael Pollan's book had just been published. This was 2018. MAPS had just been given the breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA. There was a lot of things starting to percolate. Here in Canada, there were online stores opening up, openly selling mushrooms online, psilocybin mushrooms online. So we could see that the discourse, the societal consideration around this was changing quite rapidly. And so it got me really excited. And even though I, to that point, had very little experience with psychedelics, I had done a lot of work with meditation and coaching and therapy and metaphysics and self-reflection and all that kind of stuff. And I knew just how powerful that could be. And I saw psychedelics as the platform that could really start to engage those kind of conversations on a much more mainstream level. Most people think about meditation and it's kind of mainstream now, but that's just like the tip of the iceberg. And I think we can go a lot farther. And I think by going a lot farther and encouraging people to do the work by themselves, or, in a therapeutic context, on a proactive basis, is probably one of the most important things we can do for the planet, for humanity. If people start getting in touch with their true selves, and what's important to them, and dealing with their traumas and their issues, this world would be a much better place. And I think psychedelics are going to be the platform to really accelerate that. So that's what got me involved, and my co-founders at Field Trip.
Happy to go now.
Go for it, Marik.
So yeah, I've been doing a lot of different types of advocacy work for a while. Started in the disability rights movement, moved into interfaith activism. But really, over the last 5 to 6 years, have been focused primarily on what I call counterculture activism and advocacy. So I built tech for the sex worker rights movement for a couple of years between SF and LA, spent a couple of years in the decentralized governance space and blockchain companies like Aragon and Democracy Earth. And really, these last 2 to 3 years have been primarily focused on psychedelics. I've had many experiences with psychedelics, and they've kind of been a part of my rearing in one way or another. But for me, I would say, being here has been really a pull to try and understand what it looks like to facilitate a much more equitable transition into a kind of post-capitalist sort of ecosystem. So what I saw a lot in the sex worker rights industry was you had this really stigmatized community, the stigmatized lifestyle. All of a sudden, billions of dollars of capital were flowing in, and before you knew it, you had a lot of sex workers that were disenfranchised. The monopolization of the entire adult industry, and just many problems that proliferated from that. And so when I saw kind of many of the same signs within the psychedelics ecosystem, and this community that had been building for decades of time, and all of a sudden billions of dollars of capital flowing in, or hundreds of millions at this point, but billions in the next few years, it became really interesting to me to understand, if I had been at the beginning of the sex worker rights movement in the early 2000s, what would I have done differently to build there, to make sure that the individuals who were really at the forefront had ownership of whatever was built afterwards. And so primarily what we focus on now is really helping folks who are community-minded entrepreneurs who have been within the community for some amount of time, individuals who are either underrepresented entrepreneurs or impact-focused or community-first, that those individuals are getting the support that they need to build companies. And that's really, the way that we've tried to approach kind of the equitable transition into this time period for psychedelics, where we're going to see a lot more capital entering into the space, and a lot of kind of high growth startup activity happening, as well as the corporatization of the psychedelic ecosystem and industry.
And for me, my background, my career has been built on work, starting a number of for-profit, nonprofit social ventures, caring a lot about sustainability, social impact, technology. And so I knew that my next thing that I was going to be doing was I wanted to have a really big impact. I have a family history of mental health issues. I've been in relationships with people with serious mental health issues, and so seeing firsthand the problem of that we're facing, the crisis we're in, and the terrible, in my opinion, solutions that are out there right now in terms of medications and treatments that just really aren't working that effectively. And so I dabbled in psychedelics like a lot of us have when I was in my teens. I'm in my mid-40s now. But I hadn't done it in a kind of therapeutic context. I hadn't really thought about psychedelics in a way that would actually be a form of treatment until started reading some of the literature that was out there. And the curiosity, to be honest, was in microdosing in the beginning. And my business partner and I, when we first thought about starting this company, it was more of an experiment, an interest in microdosing. Does it have any benefit beyond placebo? How would you be able to tell? And how could we just do a simple study, a citizen science experiment to determine that? And that was the formation of the company and the introduction to many of the people like Paul Stamets and others that are part of the company now. And what we realized is that there's the medical industry, the medical research industry is incredibly expensive to do research. It's really inefficient, and it has not yet been effectively disrupted with technology. And there's a huge opportunity to decentralize the way that research is done, to make it way more streamlined, to democratize the research process, to bring way more people into the process. And that's really what we've decided to do with our company. And that's what our platform enables people to do, and to do research at scale and generate evidence. And really that's what I believe is going to be the change that we need to find more evidence that these therapies, these treatments actually work in the way that we think they are. And it's important that the companies that are out there that are going through the clinical trials are doing that work, and that's very expensive and time consuming, and that's important. But it only addresses a very small number of substances and a very small number of indications. And we know that the underground community, there's a lot of people that are consuming all kinds of substances and in therapeutic context as well. And there's very little data about the evidence and efficacy and safety and contraindications of those. So there has to be a different way of collecting that information. And so that's what our platform is able to do, is be able to collect that information in a way that protects anonymity and confidentiality among the therapists and the participants, to then create a body of knowledge that research the research community and the industry can learn from and use to inform preclinical trials and other ways of bringing this medicine to everybody.
Cool, thank you all. Yeah, I think these are all really great answers. It's clear that all of you have very different paths that have brought you here, and yet you're in this ecosystem nonetheless, which is really cool. And kind of to transition off of that, did all of you study something like this in undergrad? Did those things that you studied in college or wherever in your early years before you got into this help you on your path? And if so, what's the best way, or I guess, can you speak to the importance of college education for the industry and entrepreneurship space? Is it necessary? If not, what's the best way that people can get their foot in the door? Yeah, I don't know if formal,
It depends. It depends what you're doing. If you're doing if you're really interested in diving deep into the research, then having a PhD and focusing and working with one specific scientist, that can be super useful. It depends what you're really building. If you're looking to build a company, there's a lot of logistical day-to-day things that are necessary that school won't necessarily teach you, but significant involvement in psychedelics won't either. Things like interpersonal dynamics, organizational culture, things that you spend most of your time doing are just not necessarily taught in schools. I studied computer engineering and then I went for an MBA. I would say none of those things, none of those curriculums were necessarily what prepared me to be able to do what I'm doing today. What did prepare me was spending, the last 5 to 6 years building companies and just building organizations and understanding what that takes. So yeah, I would say, really taking as much as you can out of the time that you have at school, but also knowing, your goals. In school, are you trying to get that PhD position at a top university? So then you have to be publishing papers and make sure that you're first author on several papers before you graduate. Are you trying to build a business? Okay, well then, trying to lead some sort of organization while you're there, or volunteering your time for startups while you're in school is probably the best way to be doing that. Leading teams, all of those things are going to really, really help with that. So, so yeah, I guess not formal education, but college definitely opens up a lot of room to be able to experiment and find what you're looking for those next steps.
Yeah, I would echo, a lot of those sentiments, to be quite honest. So I did business in undergrad, and then I went to law school. I'm still a qualified lawyer. My perspective on formal education is that if you go to university to get a job, you're not doing it right. I was a person who went to university to get a job, and I look back and I realize that's the wrong way to do it. The way I think about the future is that, and I know I'm an outlier here, but I actually think, studying the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, it's interesting, but anything that's logic driven will soon enough be done by computers better than humanity. There's no question about that. So what does humanity offer? It's creativity, right? Where logic can't complete the equation, that's where you need creativity. So the most important skill in the future, or in the near future, I think, are going to be creativity and concentration, because those are two things that creativity is never in enough supply, and concentration is certainly in short supply these days. So if you have those two attributes for yourself, then I think you'll be in good stead, and that's what's going to distinguish you going forward. And then in within the university context, the best way I think and again, I was always a guy who wanted to get to university, get through undergrad, get to law school, become a lawyer and have a great life, make lots of money. And it turns out being a lawyer generally sucks. And I generally discourage most people going down that path. And I'm happy to talk about that in more depth. But what I would have done in hindsight is focused on a liberal arts education, taking the lens of creativity being the most important skill of the future. Then creativity is most easily achieved if you have a number of different models and spectrums to look through to come up with ideas, whether it's history or economics or science or math or all of these kind of things. All of those will help inform creative decisions where you have to make a leap that's not within the logical realm that requires creativity. And so sorry, I'm getting a phone call. So that's kind of my perspective. And so did my education help me? Not in direct ways, in ways that it gave me more robust ability to think about things differently, to challenge conventions, to look where other people are looking. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that was a function of all of the experiences, not having studied accounting or math or computer engineering or anything along those lines. So I think, I very much resonate what Marik said about that. It's just yeah, I just don't think university leading to jobs is the path forward. I think everyone's got to get a little bit more innovative, a little bit more hustle, a little bit more creative. If you really want to, again, it depends on your path for the future, but if you really want to get into this industry or anything that's new and exciting, it's really about just making things happen, however you can make that happen.
Yeah, I agree with a bunch of that too. The if you're wanting to get work in a very specialized, hyper specialized kind of role or in academia, then yeah, you have to play the game and get the PhD or get that kind of formal education. If you want to play in the space of entrepreneurship, then I think it's partly a personality thing. I mean, you need to if you're risk adverse, it's not going to work for you. And a lot of times people are really looking for confidence to go out and do something. And so the letters after their name can sometimes be that confidence that they need. But in the end, it's the experience. It's the experience that will actually make you. And you need to find that experience as quickly as possible. So if you can get into, like as Marik was saying, whether it's student groups or things like that, where there's peer mentoring groups or where there's some startups and some entrepreneurs that are trying things, just be around people. You need to surround yourself with people that you want to become, and talk to those people and find out how did they get there. If you're like, I want to be where you are, just start as many information interviews as you can. Talk to these people and find out how they got there. And I would, I would also kind of question getting an MBA. You can just hire someone with an MBA. There's a lot of MBA people that need jobs. And so I studied mechanical engineering and philosophy. And so getting to what Ronan was saying around a liberal arts degree to help with how you think, I also resonate with that too. I think that that's probably one of the greatest benefits of studying liberal arts or philosophy or any of those kinds of programs, where you're training yourself how to think critically, and that's universally applicable. And so, if you can think critically, then you're going to be able to make better decisions in life. And not all education helps you think, but in a liberal arts it does. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely resonate with a lot of that. I think most of what I've learned about this field, about this ecosystem, has happened after university for me. While I value everything I learned in university, it was developing creativity outside of it and out of those bounds of memorization that has really helped me. And I think going off of that, it's a good question to ask. What's the biggest thing that someone that's possibly in university or around that age, 18 to 22, what's the biggest thing that they can do to prepare themselves for founding their first company or startup in the space?
I would say get okay with failure, because you're probably going to fail, and that's okay. My favorite author, Tom Robbins, has a great quote where he says, so I'll find the actual quote, but it goes something along the lines of, so you think you're a failure, do you? Well, what's so wrong with that in the first place? If you know anything, you'll know that our greatest success take as much out of us or cost as much as our greatest failures. So go ahead and fail. Go ahead, but fail with style, fail with grace, fail with wit. That may be the only way any of us will ever be free. Something along those lines. But the truth is just keep trying. If you look at most successful people, all of them have the same, and put successful in quotes. I mean, there's a number of different ways, but if we're talking in like the purely economic entrepreneurial kind of success model, almost all of them have great stories of failures or near failures. And the most important attribute, and I've heard this from a number of investors, is that especially early stage investors, which is they're very rarely investing in the idea, and they're investing in the team. And the most important attribute in the team is their grit, is their determination. That's the most important attributes. And so getting comfortable with not being a success at first, because you probably won't be, and that's perfectly okay, is probably one of the best things you can do to get started.
Yeah. I would say one thing that has helped me, I think, relates to the failure thing is being rejected, being okay with people saying no. And a good way to get that kind of experience is sales. Like if you can, I did door-to-door sales for one of the local newspapers, and when I was a kid, and man, that was tough, but it just, you kind of get used to it. You kind of like, yeah, you know what? It's okay. It's not personal. It's just like, and then you refine your pitch. You just keep going. And then you start to learn about personality, psychology, like what kind of story is going to work for this person? What kind of story is going to work for that person? And that's hugely valuable when it comes to starting a company and you're trying to raise money for your company as well, or you're leading teams, so I think, yeah, sales can help. That's one thing. And as I said before, just, yeah, if you can, don't wait to find the most perfect opportunity. Like, just start something. Like, if you have an idea for, I don't know, like maybe not a fart app, but like whatever, some kind of simple app, like something that's like, really, just try it out. Like, what would it take? Like, what's the MVP for this? Like, just take something that excites you, that you're passionate about, that you thought about, oh, this might be a cool idea, and just try to model it out. Try to think, how would I turn this into a business? And yeah, there's lots of great resources out there to read, some good books, some good ways of thinking about how to, like the business model canvas, or there's one that's really good. I'm trying to remember, maybe you guys can help me. It's about, like, what's it called? It's about how to talk about your business to convince your mom. Does someone know this one? I'll come to me in a second.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Anyways, it's actually a really good one, and it's just about trying to get really honest feedback from people. And if I remember it, I'll share it later. But that's also a good book for thinking about a business model, and then communicating it and pitching it, and then testing and validating it.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I would add is, like, get as much practice as you can, like building community, because whatever your company ends up being is going to be a little community. And whether that's like board game nights, or clubs, or psychedelic treks, whatever it is that you're organizing, like, you want to be practicing what it means to get people to sign on to some vision and keep them engaged for a long period of time. And the best way to do that is just by helping people build connections with other human beings. And if you can be the facilitator of that, I think that that's probably been the most useful thing to me as we've built, is like building an ecosystem where people show up every single day extremely excited to be contributing, because they're surrounded by other people who are extremely excited, because everyone's aligned and like they just want to be vibing on like the same thing. So building community of any sort is, I think, what leads folks to be successful entrepreneurs as well. And when I think about the successful entrepreneurs that I know, that I went to school with, they were also just like incredible community builders. Yeah, just also something to really practice. And in college, you have so many people available to you to share interests with, that it's like the best place to experiment and do those things with.
A buddy of mine is a guy named Jason Guillenard, who started a community called Mastermind Talks, and he's got a great quote, which is, your network is your net worth. And he's got an incredible story of like starting a successful business, having it crash and burn, being totally in debt, but because he invested in relationships, so heavily, and because people just appreciated everything he's always done, and he is always there for you. And I can speak to this personally, that when he needed a favor, it came. And when he needed to borrow 80 grand to buy a whole bunch of Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Work Week to, get Tim to come speak at a conference, someone lent him the $80, and he's built an amazing business based on that, just because he was really a solid person who was just always there for people who needed them, and always reaching out. So I totally echo that point. That being said, also keep in mind, like, if that's not who you are, don't try to be someone you're not. Recognize that there's always growth, and you can always become something, but don't feel obliged to like be an extrovert if you're an introvert. It's nice to be able to flip it back and forth, but also be honest with who you are, or I think more accurately, where you are at a given moment. You can always be whatever you want to, but don't live a lie if it's not true to you either.
I just remembered the book, The Mom Test, Rob Fitzpatrick. So if anyone wants to look that one up, it's a good one.
Definitely will do. Yeah, I appreciate all of this. I think it's all very, very good advice for really anyone trying to get in the space, whether you're like 18 or 30, Yeah, so far we've talked very generally about entrepreneurship, and at times not necessarily about psychedelics. So I kind of want to bring it into focus a little bit and talk a bit about the general profit motive of companies and how that aligns with psychedelics and the psychedelic culture. So if any of you would like to speak to this idea of a psychedelic business model and what you envision for the future of that, how this differs from standard corporate models, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a really good direction to go in here.
Well, I don't think it has to differ from a standard business model. I mean, having spent many years in the sustainability field, there's a kind of it seems that culturally in that field, there's an aversion to making money, it seems, and almost like money is bad. But if you truly want to be sustainable and you want to have impact, you have to make money, you have to be profitable. And that's part of sustainability. And so I think the same is true, for in psychedelics and in the psychedelic field. You need to be making money in order to continue growing and having the impact that you want to have. And really, it's just about, like deciding what kind of impact you want to have in the world, and what your values are, and then living those values. And so if you're you don't, if you're not interested in supporting certain industries, then maybe you don't take money from investors that are affiliated with those industries, right? Or if diversity and inclusion is super important to you in your company, then walk the talk and make that part of your entire, like how you run your business and the people that you hire and how you, the kind of work that you do, the impact, the whole chain of custody of all the different contractors and things like that. So there's ways of embedding this into your company, and there are frameworks and tools to do that as well. I have experience going through certifying one of my companies as a B Corp, and I've done that twice and got to the best of the world 3 years in a row in the top 10%. So I know what it takes to make a company, a for-profit company, be really aligned from a sustainability and social impact point of view. That it's not quite relevant for Quantified Citizen right now as a startup, but most likely we will go down that path. Yeah, I think, yeah, I would say it's just about aligning with your values, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
It's a big topic in the psychedelic community. I think unfortunately a lot of it is fear-based and not necessarily informed. Business can be a very powerful force for good. Unconstrained, it can become problematic. But overall, I think if you look at what we've achieved in the 20th century in terms of reducing poverty, reducing hunger, reducing infant mortality, extending, the average lifespan significantly, a lot of it has been built on the structure of a neoliberalist for-profit kind of enterprise motivated system. And that's not to say it's universally good. I think everything has good and bad components, but I think operating a for-profit business model is perfectly fine. I think the only thing that I would ask, and certainly what I see in the industry so far, is that people are doing it consciously. People recognize that unconstrained business can be a very destructive force, but properly constrained, properly considered, it can be a very powerful force for good. And I've had a lot of conversations with people on our team who feel discomfort about working for a for-profit enterprise within the psychedelic sphere. And I think one of the most insightful pieces of feedback I got from one of the members of our team was he recognized that money is just energy, and so it's not inherently good or bad. It's really what you do with it that is the consideration. And I thought that was a very powerful insight. It really is just about anything, and it can be a very good tool for good. But I know a lot of people are trying to impose morality on how psychedelic companies are operating, and I genuinely believe that they are well-intentioned, what people are proposing. But what I also do know, having been a lawyer and see it happen so many times, is that Regulation and imposing principles on other people is not usually well received and always leads to unintended consequences. And so I don't have a perfect answer, because giving people free rein to do whatever they want is probably not a good idea, but imposing values on people who don't necessarily subscribe to those values, or imposing rules that just incentivize people to try and figure out a way around those rules, also doesn't work. So I don't have a perfect answer. And the best I've come up with so far is just, demand that people be conscious and thoughtful. And that doesn't mean they come to the same conclusions as you, and that's okay. But as long as they, agree to come in with open eyes and an open mind, I think that's really the most we can ask for business people in the space. But truthfully, I think that's the right principle for everybody. Just always try to keep an open mind and be open to changing your mind.
Yeah, there's, as everyone's saying, like, there's so many things to consider. It's really, I mean, we're very much at the beginning of modern business, and we are literally in day zero of like building impact well, and understanding impact and how to do it well as kind of entering into this like really sensitive state of the world, which we've kind of been building to for a long time. I agree with Eesmyal and Ronan that there's a villainization of corporations, and what I would say is, I remember the management school I went to is the best school in the world for nonprofit management. So we do a lot of cases on nonprofits, and if you look at nonprofits, they're actually the most corrupt organization. Okay, 501c3s. They have significantly more cases of sabotage within the C-suite. They have significantly more cases of theft that happen because oftentimes individuals within those organizations don't feel safe financially. There is not as much financial stability. There's this constant race to be able to feel okay. And this is something that we're seeing right now in the psychedelics ecosystem as well. There are individuals who've been here for a while who have built, really promising organizations that function as nonprofits. Some of them have been widely successful, the ones that have been able to receive funding, and some of them have been extremely corrupt and have, done irreparable harm to indigenous communities, to, psychedelic community members, just because they are constantly living on the edge. For instance, I was talking to some of the nonprofits that run down in the Amazon. They have been running operations that, saying like profits don't matter, profits don't matter, profits don't matter. And then when COVID hit, there was a humongous crisis for indigenous communities within that space, because many of them were not able to rely on that stream of income that was coming from the tourist industry. They had no infrastructure that was built for themselves. There was just so many problems that happened as a result of those organizations being irresponsible and not having the cash reserves to be able to support a community that they were building with as well. And so it's a lot trickier than just like, money in, money out, and like, corporate greed and things like that. Yes, a lot of that is very much taking over the space right now. And there are, massive amounts of companies that are just, pump and dumps and extractive, and investors that you talk to only care about, profit maximization. That's definitely there. But at the same time, there's a lot of individuals who are really fighting hard to understand what it means to build impact for this space. And that's a really, really tricky problem to solve, and one that very few people have any sort of semblance of answer to. And literally the entire world is trying to figure out the best way to do it. It's especially difficult with mental health, because when you're talking about sustainability and you're talking about, creating companies that remove carbon, for instance, you have like very quantifiable ways of measuring that. With mental health, you can say you're taking this many people and you're reducing depression rates for this amount of time with a certain demographic, but you're not necessarily as able to measure the negative externalities of promoting compounds, for instance. So like you look at antidepressants, antidepressants were also extremely effective when they first came out, and over the last few decades have significantly plummeted in their efficacy rates because there was a lot of hype at the beginning, and that has steadily climbed down, and now they're barely as effective as placebo. So the question is like, is some of that going to happen with psychedelics as well? What does it look like when you're constantly advertising psychedelics like we have been with antidepressants? Are there going to be individuals who turn to psychedelics, and what is going to be the conversation around that? Because with antidepressants, with stimulants for ADHD like Ritalin and Adderall, you have an entire demographic of children, adults that are growing up and relying on these medicines, but not necessarily getting the preparation and integration pieces of that are needed to really be able to transition a person from being dependent on a medication to a point where they can be functioning afterwards. And so the thing that I think is most promising about psychedelics is that they do have built into the therapeutic modalities processes of preparation and integration. And we know right now that we can get really long-term effects if we're doing several psychedelic assisted therapy sessions, and then moving that individual into a process of integration where they're extending those pieces. That's what I think corporations in this space need to be holding onto, because it's as soon as it starts getting into microdosing, as soon as it starts getting into how often can we re-engage and monetize people based on their consumption of psychedelics instead of their engagement in the integration, preparation, reassociation processes on either sides of the experience. That's when I think we're going to start pushing people unnecessarily into the psychedelic realm without them being prepared and being ready for all of the consequences, both good and bad, that come with that. So I know that's kind of a rant, but just a lot of the things that are being thought about by, I think, a lot of community members.
Yeah, no, I think all of you have had very good points here. Just going off of what Marik said here, yeah, I think that it built into the psychedelic modality is something that is hard to monetize without microdosing every day, without doing internet integration sessions or all of these things. It's hard to have these very slow one-off journeys. It's very different from the SSRI movement. And I think that's where we get into these questions of what are these mismatches between profit and values. And I think a good question to focus in on here is how do you, as a for-profit corporation, deal with the mismatches between company values, your intentions of helping people on the earth, and the profit maximization itself that's inherent in a for-profit company? And how do you, if you have any examples of these trade-offs and how you maximize both of these and optimize for both of these, please go ahead and give those as well.
I can quickly touch on the investment piece because I saw that someone wrote it in the comments. I think that that's one of the most tricky pieces because, yeah, you are being pressured by investors to grow, and so that can create a lot of misaligned incentives. And if you're a public benefit corporation or you're structured in a different way, that can really mitigate some of those things. Some of the other things to think about is like, what is the type of company, and like what is when you're structuring an investment portfolio, right? So like, if you're looking at a waterfall of exits and you're saying that there are certain companies that are going to be exiting after 3 years, so they're liquidating, someone is either purchasing them or they're going public, and that's really when people make their money, is a liquidation event. You need to be thinking about like which companies you're putting pressure to liquidate earlier, and those that you're putting pressure on to liquidate later, more so than I think in other investment portfolio building. So for instance, a company that's building technology that might scale to clinic systems, to me, feels more ethical to be able to push on to exit faster or to be able to grow faster than a company that is providing some sort of care. Because a company that's providing some sort of care is dealing directly with the end consumer. And if their growth is basically a consequence of how many more people they can onboard and how quickly they can do that. And so I think it's really important for companies, for especially investors in the space, to be thinking about what does it look like to balance a portfolio in the psychedelic space, and make sure to front load specific types of investments and backload others as much as you can control that. And there's not that much control, but there is some conscious planning when you're meeting with teams and founders, setting intentions and really understanding how they're going to be growing. So I think in investment, that's one thing, but there's also a lot of interesting impact investment methodologies that I'm happy to share and send to folks that kind of give you a this amount of money invested results in this impact, and being able to standardize that across different companies, and really look at those metrics as the way to make investments, and saying, you invest $1 million here, you're going to get this reduction in depression through this company, I think is another way to kind of be looking at impact in the space, and be prioritizing people over profits in the process of still dealing with capital.
I think that was very eloquent. I don't have a whole lot to offer. I think, those were very insightful perspectives. The only thing I can offer from our experience so far is that, deal with each situation as it comes. The problem with hard and fast rules is that they don't fit all circumstances. And so maintaining a flexible mindset while still trying to adhere to core values is important. I also believe that I think it's a trope that you can either be profit maximizing or you could be good for the environment. And I don't think that's true. I think we're starting to see that you can do well and do good at the same time, that you can create real value without creating destruction and continue to grow that. I think that's a possibility. And I think just changing the mindsets around it's one or the other is probably something that we need to shift. Otherwise, people will keep thinking in that mindset and not look for the solutions where, you can do well and do good at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't have a ton to offer, except for just an example that kind of helped me kind of turn things around in thinking around the profit maximization. I was at a kind of conference for social ventures a number of years ago, and one of the founders who was interviewed, who was presenting, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was like an office supply company in the States, but it was a big company, and they had branches in most of the states, but they were kind of operating like a nonprofit, but they were a for-profit. And the two founders decided they're going to pay themselves just a base salary, and they're going to give 100% of the profits away. And so they did this, and they said, okay, well, all of our customers can decide where the money goes and to which nonprofits, which charities and things like that within the state. And so they would vote every year, okay, this is who gets it. And they wouldn't ask for any kind of reporting or anything like that. They just gave the money away. And they had this epiphany one day when they thought about, well, wait a minute, we've become this huge company that's creating all this value, all this good, for supporting all these nonprofits all across the country. And we're just giving the money away. What if we supported companies like us? What if we found companies that were also wanting to grow, be profitable, and have impact? What if we actually help them out? Because it only took us like 10 grand each to get it going, to kind of bootstrap and start the company. What if we found other founders and did the same kind of thing? So they started investing in other social entrepreneurs and putting that money in. And so I feel like for me, that was a turning point of realizing, yeah, you know what, you can, there's different business models, and you can create impact in a really positive way if you just rethink how things are structured. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, doing good and as Ronan mentioned, and making money, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think these are very good points. It's not necessarily a balance or a trade-off. It does depend on the modality and what you're working with exactly, but there are still ways of working within the system to do some good with it. And I think as a final closing question for this sort of ethics conversation, both from PsychedelXers as well as someone in the Q&A that I accidentally dismissed, I'm very sorry. How do we as psychedelic companies and as a psychedelic ecosystem work to both amplify and elevate the communities that you aim to serve, as well as ensure equity in your mission, through both diversity and all of that sort of thing?
I mean, with Field Trip, my perspective, and I think people will disagree with it, and that's perfectly fine, because I'm still open and trying to figure it out. But it's one of those things where a lot of people express concern about the fact that psychedelic therapies are very expensive, and therefore probably mostly the realm of rich white men, probably, to be quite honest. And there's a real challenge in trying to establish access. And one of the biggest challenges is that when you're looking at the timeframes with, even if it's ketamine, which is only about an hour experience, but when you get up to 4, 6, 8 hours with MDMA and psilocybin, then it's much more expensive, right? And you got to have doctors and therapists and professionals and all that kind of stuff to make sure this is safe. Like, it's not easy to make these accessible. And so there's like this give and take about like, well, you need to build a sustainable business in order to potentially open up access, but do we further exacerbate differentials between the majority and marginalized communities or people? You don't even have to be marginalized, but it's a give take challenge, right? And there's no perfect answer. Certainly, I haven't come up with a perfect answer on this. My philosophy, though, and this also goes to the concerns around profit maximization and all that kind of stuff, is that you can't really help but be touched by psychedelics. Like, it's going to open your eyes to something. And I think even if we're only serving a community of people, and don't get me wrong, it's not my ambition to do this, but even if you only serve rich white men with access to psychedelic therapies, it's going to change them in a way that I think is constructive and positive, and will create an army of people who are more open-minded and more willing to think about how we address the challenges of equity and access and all that kind of stuff. And so, that's kind of where I land on this, which is like, right now it is expensive and I don't have a good solution in order to expand access. But I do believe that by even serving anybody and just getting more people open-minded to psychedelic therapies and what goes as a result of psychedelic therapies is going to further the, I think, vision and mission that most people I know in the psychedelic community are trying to achieve, which is one of like a healthier, happier, more equitable world. And I know it seems counterintuitive that creating more inequity is going to create equity, but I do genuinely believe that that's a possible outcome here. And that makes me okay with moving forward with a structure that's still expensive and therefore is probably going to exclude people, even though that's not our desire. That's just kind of the parameters we're working with, and I still think it leads to the right outcomes around that. And like I said, I'm open to having my mind change, and if people have better ideas about how to navigate this question, I'm all ears, because it's one that we think about and talk about a lot, and we just don't have good answers that we can all get behind yet.
For me, I personally, I volunteer as a director for MAPS Canada. So it's a psychedelic nonprofit in Canada, and I'm on the board of directors. So I support the community in one way through my time and my effort in that organization. But also my company, Quantified Citizen, the platform is inherently democratizing technology. So we are all about democratizing the process, the research process, so that it is available to support the psychedelic community and also beyond psychedelics. So I think that one of the ways that we're hoping to one of the projects that we're working on and is totally open to, we actually have an agreement already with IPN to work on this project, is the Psychedelic Data Project. And this is a very large, ambitious project of developing a very enormous longitudinal observational cohort of psychedelic guides and participants. And so this would be available as for free to the underground community to use for best practice. And so we're developing a number of protocols for this. So we just finished a 5-MeO-DMT protocol, and we're working on psilocybin protocol and a number of other ones. And this is working with professional research community and the underground community to really make this available for them to use as best practice. And so the idea is that this is basically a gift, a tool for the psychedelic community and the underground community for the underground community to really understand what's working and create a kind of open source set of best practices that can continuously evolve. but also for then the participants to get insight into what's working for them or not. And so it's empowering at both levels. And so for students interested in this kind of project, we're looking for more support and in helping with the development of some of the protocols and being involved in some of this project at different degrees, whether it's on the software side or the analysis of data. And so happy to chat about that privately if people are interested.
Yeah, I think the way that we try to approach it is, I'm probably of the opposite mindset of Ronan, is, really building for folks who are not included in the system first, is something that more of us should be spending time on, just because capitalist forces will take care of, everyone else. And so but it depends on like what you're trying to do in the space and like how you're trying to show up for it. Like, I know that my intention in 10 years down the road is like to be surrounded by, a group of individuals who I really love spending time with and who we can like look back and say, we really tried our best to like make impacts happen and to do the best thing we could for this space. That's not the intention or goal for a lot of different organizations. And that's cool. Like, people have different things that they're coming to this space with. For us in our incubator, we're really, the things that we're trying to prioritize is how do we, again, create equitable distribution of this space. We want to see not only underrepresented entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs who have really contributed to this community beforehand and really understand the complex dynamics of it and can then empower other individuals to be able to create change. But outside of like, really supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs within the ecosystem, one thing I wish more startups and founders were doing was paying attention more to the underground, because I think while working with the underground is tricky and prohibited if you're any sort of legitimate above ground company, paying attention to what's going on and trying to contribute time to building out infrastructure that make the underground safer for more people to be able to participate, I think is important for two reasons. I think first off, it really lowers the barriers to access to receive psychedelic assisted therapy. And I think it also significantly de-risks the possibility for there being some serious tragedies that result from people just having access to psychedelics left and right without proper education around them. And so, one of the projects that we were working on with a few folks earlier on was, there's all of these underground dispensaries popping up. Can we open source, packaging designs for whatever products that they're selling for them to be able to include setting, integration, preparation in the packaging that they're issuing, right? So like, that's not necessarily something that we're getting any sort of cash flow from. We're not necessarily working with the underground, but we are open sourcing something and promoting it to the underground to be able to try and make that space a little bit safer. Because I do think that distributed networks of trip sitters and healers are what's going to lead to greater access, but it's also what's going to lead to greater possibilities and greater occurrences of schizophrenic breaks, bipolar disorder, fatalities from psychedelics that just happen from irresponsible settings. All of that's going to happen as well. And so I wish that there was just more attention paid from the more mainstream entrepreneurial community to how we can be helping the underground develop in the safest way possible, because I think that that's two birds with one stone. One is access and one is de-risking it for everyone who's building above ground as well.
I just wanted to clarify, and I think that's great, to be quite honest, is that like, I'm not certainly in any way advocating that psychedelic therapy should be for the rich, but it's just like, if that's the consequence, if that's the only path forward, I still think it's a worthwhile path forward to go down that. And I totally hear your comments. The concern I have is just, you're right. You touched on it. It's like when you open up the underground, as soon as you try to establish regulations and standards and all that kind of stuff, it inherently increases cost. And so there's this push pull of how do you like ensure safety with access, because more access means more potential risk, but more safety means more cost. And it's such an intractable challenge. And listen, I think it's awesome that you're working on it, and then clearly we're thinking about it as well, but your thought is definitely more advanced and sophisticated. So I'm grateful for what you're doing and love it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that we've really just tried to, at least give a little bit of our time to causes like that, because you're right. It's like you're working on such thin margins in regards to finances and time, especially at the startup phase, that it's really difficult to allocate your energy to anything else. But for us, it's more, we have this kind of community around us. We know that our community wants to act on these things. Can we sacrifice a half-hour meeting every week to be able to have a meeting with community activists and kind of share design files, share our time and resources as a staff, and every person on staff allocating that half hour to an hour can really add up significantly to being able to make some of these projects happen. But we've had to be super intentional about keeping that part of our culture. But I think that that's also what's made our culture better, is folks coming in and being interested in the underground side, knowing that they can't necessarily interact with it through our organization, but being able at the same time to help out at least our community and our the folks that contribute to our ecosystem are much more interested in that space as well. So it's also been much more natural for us to provide that, whereas that's not the case for every startup or organization.
For sure.
Yeah, great. I'm happy to see everyone is going about this in their own way, whether or not that be top down or bottom up. I think it's an important thing to acknowledge as we are really building things on a very, very rich history, and a history that has been illegal for a long time. We've had decades of therapists working underground with the risk of legal issues, and it's difficult to just say, oh, we're going to come in and we're going to do this now legally. So we really have to be intentional and think about how we're exactly going to do this. And with that, I also just want to acknowledge we are 4 male presenting people on this panel, and we need to build something better in the future where that is not the case anymore, where we can actually bring underserved communities into this world and actually build something supportive, uplifting, and with a sense of collective healing and justice. And with that, I think that this is a good note to end on. So I'd like to ask you all just one more question to close things out. Where is this world going? Where is this ecosystem going in the next 5, 10, 15, 50 years from now? And let's say it. Where is this going? What are we doing? What are we building? And where is the empty space? Where are the holes that still need to be filled in?
That's $1 million question, and not one that's probably suitable to short answers. But what I see happening over the next 5 to 10 years is you'll see legal access to MDMA and psilocybin, and probably a number of other psychedelic therapies through FDA, Health Canada channels. You'll also see legalization efforts starting to succeed, like happened in Oregon, which is going to create a very, I think, healthy and robust paradigm in which there's more conventionally medically supervised approaches that have insurance coverage and thus are more cost affordable potentially for people who are genuinely sick, quote unquote, in terms of DSM. I put quote unquote because I think notions of depression and PTSD are really more appropriately defined as a spectrum, and it's hard to actually say where someone's actually sick except for the DSM, which is helpful, but I don't necessarily know conclusive of what delineates between PTSD and not having PTSD and just having trauma that all people experience. But I think it's going to be great that we'll have a medical system that should have hopefully robust insurance coverage that will help the most extreme instances get access to therapy, and then you'll have a more wellness-based system like that is being developed in Oregon that will be more accessible for people who don't necessarily have the extreme cases to deal with. I think that's a great place to start. And I think in 5 years, you'll see pretty robust access to that kind of stuff. You'll have a regulated system that helps, manage the downside risk while maximizing the upside benefit to people who can actually access the system. I don't know it does much for accessibility in terms of broader marginalized groups. I think that's still going to be a challenge in 5 to 10 years, but I do think we also have to be somewhat incremental, which is we need to create systems that the majority of the population can get comfortable with, see as working, seeing as safe, and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll have a lot more flexibility to have conversations about being really innovative and expanding the scope. And I think that's exciting. I think 3 years ago, if you asked anyone that this would be a possibility, almost everybody here would say, like, there's no way that's happening in the next 5 to 10 years. And here we are. So I think things are going, in a very positive way by and large. It's not exclusively so, but I generally like the direction of things. I generally like the people who are leading the space. I feel like they're well-intentioned. I feel like they're trying to do it in a way that's thoughtful and intentional. You may disagree with their approaches, but I do believe they're generally inspired and informed by good intentions and things we can all get behind. And so I have a lot of hope and I'm excited for where this starts to lead.
Yeah, I guess I'll start out. We're working on this book right now, Our Trip Together, myself and Maya Albert, and it's been a really interesting exploration into like the history of the ecosystem and what's here today and what could be there for the future. And I guess I'll like start with like a little bit more of a dark picture and hopefully paint something more light. But through the research in this book, a lot of our time has been spent just like studying, the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and what happened. And it's been really interesting just seeing the press around psychedelics over the last few years, because there is very little conversation that's happening around kind of the dark sides of significantly greater access within the space. Like just remembering that like we are representing the entrepreneurial side and the above ground side of things, but there is an entire underground that's also, just growing extremely rapidly. And the last time that this happened, there were many consequences to that. And just really, seeing kind of the negatives of psychedelics, how they can be used to manipulate, how they can be used to, just really take advantage of individuals, how we saw that from everything from Charles Manson to mescaline being used in concentration camps. There's a very dark route for this to take, and we already know that the CIA is signing contracts with for-profit entities in the space to try and continue some of this research. So there's definitely many dark paths that this can go. And I think it's just important for us to be like conscious of that and understand that these substances, we don't necessarily have anything to show us that, I don't believe we have research to show us that they're inherently positive. They're very neutral in the effects that they can have and are informed in many ways by set and setting, integration, preparation, everything that comes around them. And so they can be used as much for harm as they can for good. So I definitely see there being a lot of negative things that are going to happen in the next 5 years. I think that there's going to be a lot of irresponsible usage, a lot of trauma that results from increased access to psychedelics. But I also think that there's going to be, greater opportunities for healing in the space, more clinic systems, more care facilities, more therapists that are trained, that are able to provide this type of care for individuals. And I think that hopefully both of those sides can talk to one another, the above ground, the underground, and really be able to de-risk and create harm reduction for the ecosystem as a whole. And that's what I'm at least hoping to see over the next five to 10 years happening in this space.
I think I definitely I see both features that were already presented. I think to anything to add on that, I'd say is where maybe there's some more opportunity could be in just training programs, like curriculum for instructors, therapists, people who are getting into this space. There is just for the MDMA program, there's not enough that trained therapists out there to support, and then looking at the ketamine space. So and Ronan knows a lot about this, but there's just you need to have some really good curriculum that's out there to train people, and we're still figuring that out. It's kind of a brand new thing. Like how do you systemize that, and how do you create a curriculum that will continuously evolve and get better and better. And then I think something that's probably going to happen will be some kind of like rate my doctor, but for like psychedelic therapists, like rate my psychedelic, like what was that experience like? Because when people are under the influence of these substances, they're very susceptible, and there's harm that could be done, as Marik mentioned. I know people who have had traumatic experiences, having psychedelic experiences, and you're just really open to things. And so we need to make sure that it's done in a safe way, and that there's some kind of reciprocal rating system or something like that for the therapist, and so that you can find people who have experience, that have the credentials, but also have the experience that's been rated from others who've worked with them. And so I think that's a need that doesn't exist right now. That's an opportunity. If someone wants to create that or build that, I think that's an opportunity as a company, maybe to build something like that. What else? I think there's going to be some really exciting things though as well. In the area of first the main focus is going to be on working with people who really need the medicine and are really sick. But then we're going to be moving into people who are already healthy and want to optimize their performance. And I think there's going to be really exciting opportunities in the future for that kind of thing. So like imagine the next version of a corporate retreat where, or an organizational retreat where there's psychedelics involved. You want to do your strategic planning and come up with think differently, come up with some new ideas. Imagine being able to introduce, a substance that's legal and it's available, and I could imagine these facilitators that normally would do corporate retreats are then getting trained in how to do psychedelic assisted corporate retreats or something like that, and providing some kind of substance that can enhance the experience to create more divergent thinking, more creativity around solutions to this problem or opportunity going forward with the company. Because you look at some of the testimonials from people like Steve Jobs and others who talk about like how important psychedelics were in thinking differently about their company and about new ideas, new technologies, new insights. So I think that's something personally I'm really excited about. I definitely, as I mentioned, with being really close to people, family with mental health issues and trauma, and my wife works in the overdose crisis with a lot of people that have trauma, and so it's very close in my world. We need to address that population for sure, but there's other opportunity as well that's for me is also equally exciting.
Cool. Well, it's absolutely a really exciting time to be here, to be working on this, and I think all of you have shared the many, many ways that this can go in both good and bad. We'll see a lot of it, and it's going to be really cool. I'm happy to close out here if you would all like. There are some miscellaneous questions in the Q&A that we can still answer. It's really up to you all if you have the energy for it. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
The two I've been looking at are Thomas Roberts asks if any of you have anything to say about the use of psychedelics as a method of problem solving, or a company that provides problem solving sessions to like with psychedelics to improve their abilities.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about at the end there, but I think definitely it can help, but I don't think it's not for everybody, and we can't be thinking about psychedelics as just this amazing tool technology that anyone can do. I mean, there's definitely people who shouldn't be consuming them, or be very careful if they have a history of mental health issues. Then definitely be very careful about it. But I think I've benefited from that, and it's not, you don't have to have a psychedelic either. I mean, cannabis can there's many different kinds of, sativa for me is great for divergent thinking and problem solving, I find. So you don't have to be on the psychedelic to do that. And I think someone actually sent a chat about their own organization that does experiential retreat. Yeah, the professor don't know who that is, but said something that they offer this, these kinds of workshops. So there's someone out there. I don't personally know anyone who does that. I don't know of a company really that's actually focuses on that. But I would imagine that Marik probably is connected to some people that do that.
Yeah, there's a few different companies that I'm aware of. There's one called PsyX, PSYX, that works specifically with executives and is trying to pioneer just like executive training for folks, specifically for problem solving and kind of psycho-activated ways of building businesses and organizations, political systems, etc. Let's see, Tanya Showman is like the best person to contact there for that. There's some organizations that use that aren't necessarily like, you wouldn't call them psychedelic organizations, but they're looking at kind of problem solving in a similar way. One Heart is another one. Tim Sekou, he's the individual I know from there. I don't know if he's one of the founders, but he's one of the main people there. So One Heart is another one. But it's, you talk to a lot of practitioners, and there's a lot of practitioners right now who are looking to do kind of executive training and psychedelic assisted therapy in that intersection. So I think it's problem solving is being mostly applied to like executive training, and but not necessarily like, students, for instance, coming together and problem solving. We did have a conversation this morning with one individual who's looking at bringing together researchers and professionals in the clean tech space and, seeing what that intersection looks like. So there's definitely conversations about it. There's not too many formal folks who are talking about problem solving, but executive training, definitely.
I don't have anything to add. I'm not familiar. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about it, but for most people, I think in the industry, focusing on the purely medical applications is where the focus is, because it seems to be the thing that's most socially and politically acceptable to be focused on right now. But I think I'm certainly excited about the potential problem-solving dynamics of psychedelic therapies as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think Fadiman's first introduction to this idea of using them for problem solving was really interesting. And then it kind of died for a long time. So I'm happy to see people are interested in this again. And perhaps a better way of leaving this off, Alan Alston asks, where do you think you would have been now if you'd never had any psychedelic experiences?
That's so hard to say. I mean, that, I don't know. It's, who knows, right? Like you can say that about anything. Like, where would I have been if I hadn't met my wife? Where have I been if I didn't do, it's just like, you could just you never know, right? Anything is just a story. It's just conjecture. So I don't know. I mean, I think that I'd like to believe the story I tell myself around this is that it allowed me to recognize that there's different ways of perceiving the world, and that's accessible, that's it's like you have a sense of how the world is before psychedelics, and you try psychedelics and then a psychedelic, and that shifts, and all of a sudden you realize you can experience things differently. Maybe you can think differently. You have an experience where time is completely different, and or you can focus your mind in different ways, and you can experience yourself in very different ways. And once you have that experience, you now know that's possible. And I feel like it just opens up the possibility. You can think more broadly about possibilities. So that's a benefit. But you don't necessarily need psychedelics to do that too. There are other ways of getting into kinds of altered states too, like meditation can help with that. Going on a maybe a 10-day silent meditation retreat, a Vipassana retreat, or something like that can also create some profound insight in how your mind works and how different ways of experiencing the world. Maybe an intensive yoga experience. There's lots of different ways to kind of get into these kind of altered states, or holotropic breath work or something like that. So you don't need to have these chemicals to to have these kinds of different insights and perceptions of how the world is. It's one way to get there, but there are other ways too.
I'd probably be in the sex worker rights space still. That's like a family and community I really love, and I'm still close to. So probably would be, yeah, continuing to contribute to that movement. Yeah, there.
I'd probably be right here. I got into a lot of this work without really having any experience with psychedelics. So I was kind of on this path, but I think Eesmyal's point was 100% spot on. It's like, how do you know? What are those things, those moments that change the course of your life? For some people, certainly there's definitive moments, and through psychedelics, and other ones it's just incremental. And I think that's one of the important things about the emergence of this industry, is that for most people, psychedelic therapies and psychedelic work, it doesn't have to be totally revolutionary. Even if it just improves your life or affects the direction by 2%, it's still very significant. And that's probably how it's going to affect most people. I don't necessarily know we're in for another 1960s and 70s where there's a massive counterculture revolution. I think you'll just find people are focused on being happier and being better partners and being more connected. And it doesn't need we don't need a massive societal shift so immediately. I think it'll happen in a much more elegant way this time around.
I just want to add one more thing on this. I think there is something that it opens up in terms of just a shared experience, and then you can relate to other people on, and that's powerful in itself. So it's like, if you haven't been to Burning Man, and then you go to Burning Man, and then you meet someone who's been to Burning Man, and then you can, oh my God, you've been to Burning Man. You just have this way to connect, right? That's kind of annoying to anyone else who hasn't been to Burning Man. And it's like that with psychedelics too. You go and you have a certain kind of experience, and someone else has also had that experience, and you have a way to relate now with that person. And so there's almost like there's a kind of like a tribe sense. There's a feeling of a tribe that is formed from people, from psychonauts, people who have had those similar experiences. And then, so if you're, I guess I would have to say that definitely, if I had never had a psychedelic experience, I probably wouldn't be in this place right now. Like I probably would, just because of the connections I have right now, and the way I'm able to relate to certain people that are pretty strategic in the business. I think that it would be different. It's unlikely that I would have those same kind of connections. So yeah, I guess I've kind of changed my answer a little bit there.
Oh, it was a great answer from all of you. I mean, I think the same for myself. I probably wouldn't be in this space or anywhere near neuroscience if I had never become interested in this to begin with, or had psychedelic experiences for that matter. Yeah, so it's 1:25, at least in Eastern Standard Time. I think we should end off here. So Eesmyal, Marik, and Ronan, thank you all so much for this pretty wonderful last hour and a half. We went through a lot of different questions, got a little intense for a bit, and I think we answered a lot of stuff for a lot of people. So I'm very glad and very grateful for all of you. Yeah. We have one or two more events for PsychedelX starting at 4:30 p.m. today. There will be a yoga nidra workshop led by Tate Ankenbrandt. So, let's get into the states of hypnagogia and all that stuff. And tomorrow is the actual finale event with one of our judges present here right now, Eesmyal, and we will have the final 6 contestants for the event presenting live to the judges tomorrow. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you all soon. All right.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ronan. Thanks, Marik.